Okay, now we ended part 1 by showing these two little fixed stereo line channels, the last two fixed stereo line channels, and they live on this white vertical strip, which, as I said, makes a very clear visual vertical dividing line separating the input section from the master section on the right. So let's look at the master section components, apart from the sockets at the top. Initially we've got this 9-band stereographic equalizer with FBQ feedback detection. Okay, 9-band graphic. Below that, the two master effects processors. You see that reflective black surface now is really coming into play. The two 24-bit FX processors live underneath the graphic. They're identical. To the right of the effects processors there are these two LED ladder meters. They have a switch at the bottom. They're dual switchable. They've got two different modes. Under the effects processors we've got 1, 2, 3 master panels that each have a different function, and finally at the bottom the subgroup and master faders. Okay. Now let's start by following this white strip down, and at the bottom of that we have got the two auxiliary master sends. These are center detented, and these are the final volume controls for the auxiliary 1 and auxiliary 2 buses, leaving their dedicated sockets up at the top here. Okay. And for beginners, if you send a little of the channels into the auxiliary 1-2 bus, the signals come along to these two controls, and these are the master volume outputs for the auxiliary 1 and 2 bus. They have an accompanying solo lamp switch with an LED lamp. That's your auxiliary send 1 and 2 masters. Below that we've got the directly below is the first subgroup, so let's now look at all the subgroups and faders. There are 4 subgroups on this board. It's a 4 subgroup board, and these subgroups are 60mm like all the other faders, channels and masters, and they're capped in this dark grey colour to distinguish them from the others. Now these 4 subgroups feed 4 dedicated subgroup output sockets at the top here. Subgroup out 1, 2, 3 and 4. These are unbalanced, by the way. I'll list the spec for the sockets at the end. Yeah, they're all unbalanced apart from the main master outs. Now basically, so these 4 subgroups feed these dedicated outs, and in a classic recording scenario you would wire up the subgroup outputs to your record inputs on your Mac or PC. Each subgroup has a solo switch with accompanying LED indicator lamp, and you can punch any subgroup into the left mix, the right mix, or with them both down you're feeding the subgroup into the main left-right mix both sides, or with the buttons both up you are not feeding the subgroup into the main left-right mix at all. That's your subgroups. Now somebody in the CM forum said that in part 1 when I was showing the channels and I arrived at the pan, I didn't explain how it worked with the channel routing buttons in terms of delivering sounds to the subgroups, and would I explain that in part 2, or was I going to? And I will now. Subgroups are called subgroups because classically you use them to group channels, input channels, to a common fader or pair of faders. It's used to collectivize channels into stereo or mono faders, so they're easily controllable and routable. Okay, so basically, to send a kick drum to subgroup 1, 2, I'll just get the I've got a drum machine down here, I'll get it going. Okay, so I've got a kick drum here. Just turn that up so you can hear it. There it is. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send it to subgroup 1, 2 by pressing that button, and this kick drum is now going to subgroup 1, 2. I'm going to drop the kick drum channel out of the main left-right mix completely. It's only now going to subgroup 1, 2. And if I raise subgroup 1, 2 and I punch subgroup 1, 2 into my main left-right mix, and turn up the volume, there's my kick drum, right, on subgroup 1, 2. But it's also on subgroup, on subgroup 1 and 2, right? It's on both subgroups. So it's going to a stereo subgroup, and I can adjust its pan position within that stereo pair of subgroups. And and ultimately that is then being fed out of output, subgroup out 1, 2, and I could record this kick drum via this subgroup output to a left-right input record on my Mac or PC and record it as a stereo track. If I just want to send the kick drum to only subgroup 1 to feed output to subgroup 1 output and only record it on input 1 on my Mac or PC, I simply, with it routed to subgroup 1, 2, I pan it all the way hard left, and now the signal flows out of this channel to subgroup 1, 2, but it's only on the left, not on the right. If I want it on the right, I pan it all the way right, and now it's on subgroup 2, but not on subgroup 1. So using the pan control in combination with the subgroup selector button, or the 3-4 subgroup selector button, I can send any channel to either pair of subgroups, and then using the pan I can determine whether it's going to go out of both outputs, both subgroup outputs, in a stereo position within that stereo pair, or I use hard left panning or hard right panning to isolate and send it to just one or the other subgroup. The other thing that subgroups do, as I said, is group channels together. So if I put the kick and snare now both going to subgroup 1, 2, they're both on subgroup 1, 2. Okay, they're both on each side. Okay, but if I pan the kick all the way left and the snare all the way right, these two channels are now arriving at this pair of subgroups with the kick only on the left and the snare only on the right. So if I then put my Mac or PC into record, I'd be recording the kick drum on whatever audio track was assigned to input 1, and I'd be recording my snare on the track that was taking its feed from record input 2, and they'd be being fed by those two outputs. Right? If I put my whole kit in, all 4 channels, and punch the last 2 drums in that kit into my 1, 2 subgroup and take them all out of the main, I've got my whole kit now on that stereo set of groups, right? Yeah, and I can record that as a stereo pair into my Mac or PC. So typical scenarios in the studio you could do is you could have 2 hardware stereo synths feeding into 4 channels. Send subgroup 1 and 2, all of them. Set a different pad sound, like one's doing strings and one's doing some type of synth pad sound. Create a mix of those 2 synths by adjusting the faders and the pan positions and the EQ and things. So I've got a blend of 2 different synths, both playing the same MIDI pattern or the same MIDI data, and the combination of those 2 hardware synths creates a brand new pad sound. I route the whole lot to subgroup 1, 2 and record it as a stereo audio track onto my Mac or PC. In a live scenario, let's say I had a drum mix. Here's my drum mix, right? All these channels. And on top of that I've got bass, guitar, keyboards and all the vocals, but I won't raise the faders for those theoretical extra instruments on the stage. Just it'll confuse things visually. That's my drum channels from a stage mix. And I've got a good balance for my kit, it sounds perfect. I then go to bring in my vocals and raise those, and I find that due to the conditions of the venue or something, I can't get the vocals up loud without some problem. So I then need to lower my whole stereo kit because it's too loud relative to the rest of the band. Well, I've only got one hand available now because I'm holding the camera, but in a live gig, what would you do? You'd have to get both hands, put your fingers across all the drum kit faders, and then using both hands lower all those faders while keeping their relative levels the same to each other to adjust your whole kit up and down, which is clearly crackers. What you do is you just punch all the drum channels into subgroup 1, 2, and then your drum kit is a stereo pair of subgroups. You can raise and lower the entire drum kit easily by just doing that, and the relative levels stay the same. If you need to adjust an individual drum channel, you do it on its channel, and there's your whole stereo kit, which can be adjusted in volume anytime you like. You can do the same thing with a brass section, or whatever you like. The point being is it collects channels together and sends them to a common fader or pair of faders, and you can use it for adjusting level easily or routing, say, a whole bunch of brass mics to a stereo pair to be recorded or something like that. So that's what subgroups do. Okay, let's move across now to the main master left-right fader. Okay, this is the main master left-right mix bus, and this is the fader for it. And this main left-right mix bus fader feeds the master outs, both at the same time, and you choose which pair of sockets you want to plug into, either the balanced XLRs or these tip ring sleeve balanced or unbalanced 1/4 inch. Okay, this master main left-right fader feeds both sockets at the same time, and you choose what to connect to. Now, in a live scenario, you'd use the balanced XLR to feed your front of house PA mix. That's the PA the audience is listening to. Okay, you'd be more than likely to use the balanced XLRs, right? And this is where I'm going to diverge from Behringer's manual. I probably won't be able to show you this because I've got the white balance turned up so high on this camera because it's quite gloomy. But basically, here's their wiring examples page. I don't know if this will show up, it probably won't, but they're showing, look, the master outs feeding a power amp and then monitor speakers. Now, that's completely wrong. I don't know who wrote that manual, but that is not right at all. I mean, well, I would never do it that way. And there's a reason for that. I'll explain that as we get there. This, in a studio, the main left-right mix and its output should be feeding your master stereo recorder, whether that's a digital device or a tape machine. This is wired to your stereo recorder, and you mix everything down out of the master fader and record it to stereo on your tape machine or DAT. And then when the mix is finishing, you fade out, etc. Right? Now, that's what the master fader does. But I'll explain why that Behringer wiring diagram is wrong in a bit, because we need to come to another section of the desk first. But just remember, this master fader, the main left-right mix bus is feeding your master outs up here. Now at the top of this master fader, we've got a little talkback mic. There's a little tiny sensitive condenser mic behind these pair of slots cut in the front panel. It has an accompanying non-latching switch, which for beginners means that type is a latching switch that stays down and clicks. This type is only active while you press it. It doesn't click and stay down. And this at the top is a talkback mic volume control. So basically, I stand in front of the mixer or sit in front of the mixer. This very sensitive mic will pick up my voice. I activate this button, the mic activates and picks up my voice, and I adjust the level here. And it feeds my voice from the mic into talk to auxiliary 1-2, so it's feeding the mic into the auxiliary 1-2 bus, which, if you remember, beginners, is used to send a mix to your musicians in the playing room, or in a live gig you use the auxiliary 1-2 bus to send a mix to your monitors on the stage. So in a studio scenario, you press this button, talk, it sends your voice into the auxiliary 1-2 bus, off to the musicians in the playing room. They hear you, and then you communicate with them like that. When they talk to you, you hear them on the mics that are plugged in to the mixer in the playing room, and that comes out of your speakers, so you hear them talking back to you, and that's how you communicate with the musicians. Okay, now to the left of this main master fader, it's not a stereo fader, remember, we have this rather interesting mono channel. Okay, this is brilliant, and it takes a summed mono feed of the main left-right mix. Okay, and it feeds it out of a dedicated mono out socket up here, which is unbalanced. Now you can use this to send out a mono full frequency mix to perhaps power a monitoring chain in a live situation or something. But it has this switchable low pass filter at the top. Okay, and you activate it and a red lamp comes on, and then you can tune the low pass filter from 30 Hz, I'll just turn that lamp off, from 30 Hz to 200 Hz. Now for beginners, a low pass filter means whichever frequency I select, only frequencies below that will pass through. So if I tune this to 120 Hz and activate it, only frequencies below 120 Hz will be coming out of this mono output. Now if you were using this as a full frequency mono send to go to a monitor chain or something, you wouldn't want to accidentally drop in this low pass filter, so Behringer have added these little raised collars either side to stop you accidentally bumping that with your thumb or something when you're around on the mixer. You've got to be more accurate to switch it in. Okay, and then you've got a mono out with a dedicated low pass filter to tune the amount of bass that's being sent out of that mono out if required. Behringer say that they've included this to power a sub. And yes, you can do that, and most people would immediately jump to assume that that meant a sub in the studio. A pair of small near fields like this, being powered from the main left-right master mix, and you can use this to send to a sub, and you've got a dedicated socket to feed your sub, and you can adjust your sub relative to the rest of your mix. Yes, you can use it for that, fantastic. But also in a live scenario. I'm looking at this mixer a lot from a live scenario because reviewers on the internet and mags tend to very rarely look at these small mixers in terms of live use. Compact 18 and 15 inch bass bins are very common now. Everyone makes them and they're very cheap, they can be, and they are efficient and they're small and they're compact. So you put this mixer with some mics, a couple of powered floor monitors, 2 monitors on poles and 1 active 18 or 15 inch bass bin being fed from this mono out. You've got an easy to wire up system that should fit in the back of a hatchback. And for beginners, bass does not have a directional characteristic. Right? Bass frequencies are not directional, so it's fine to have your bass end in mono. So this out at a live gig can feed 1 or more powered bass cabinets, or it can feed a mono power amp with as many cabinets as you want to wire to that. Yeah. And if you want, you can adjust the amount of bass content using this low pass filter and adjust your bass mix, your bass end of the PA mix using the fader. So for live it's a bonus, a real bonus. Of course in the studio scenario, because you've got a master left right, a mono master channel and 4 subs, you could potentially do surround mixing with this, I suppose. Okay, well that's your mono out. Very, very, very useful that would be too, especially at a live gig. Killer feature that. Just, I would say that maybe I'd have liked to see this low pass filter go up to 500-600 hertz, but most of these bass bins, powered bass bins, have got a crossover built in, so it's not really a big deal. Right, that leaves these 2 little panels here, the master effects units, the graphic and the metering. Let's just look at this CD tape and get this out of the way. You've got this little CD tape panel, okay, has a switch which says standby mutes all channels, and when it's activated the red LED comes on. And up here in the master sockets area you've got a CD tape, pair of phono ins and phono outs. So how this works and where you'd use it for beginners would be this: you'd wire your tape or CD deck into the inputs here. Now when you press this button, it mutes all the incoming channels from arriving at the left-right main mix, feeding the PA. So you don't want to accidentally activate that, hence it's got the raised collars again to make it harder to switch by accident. Right? So what you do is you lower this volume, the band's playing, you've got your tape CD wired up with the CD in it ready to press play. The band finishes playing, the audience applauds, you drop this switch, it cuts all the mics from arriving at the main PA front of house left-right mix. You press play on your CD or tape deck, fade up your backing music, you go off and change the bands over, the audience goes for a pint, and when the next band is ready to play, you fade your music out, lift that switch, and now the mics are active going to the front of house mix and the next band can begin playing. That's what it does. The outputs are permanently wired to the master main left-right bus, okay, but not post fader. It's wired pre-fade, so it doesn't matter where this fader is. This pair of outs will continually take a feed to record a gig from your main left-right out, okay, but you wouldn't plug a recorder into that in the studio. Just use that if you want to record your gig live, yeah. So that's what that does. It's quite useful, and this is its control panel. Okay, now one of the hardest things to explain of all in a short time, and that is this phone control room panel. Now, this is where I'm going to diverge from the information given in the Behringer manual. This phone control room panel, this is the volume control, feeds this dedicated phone control room socket up here. This is a stereo socket, and you can plug headphones, or like I've done, a stereo plug going to 2 mono plugs to feed my monitors. Why should you use this always for your monitors and not the main left-right out as Behringer show in their manual? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of several things. One, this phone control panel has buttons allowing you to listen to anything you like by choosing the button. So you can then listen to whatever you like coming out of this socket on your headphones or your monitors. Right? And the other reason that you should use this for your monitors in the studio is because the solo bus is wired to this phone control room output. It's not wired to your main left-right bus. If I solo a channel, it does not override my main left-right mix bus. it only overrides this phone control room bus, which I classically would call a monitor bus. Okay, some bigger or older mixers will have a dedicated pair of sockets for the phone control, for the control room out, and then a separate headphone socket maybe with its own volume control. In this case, Behringer, to cut cost and space, have made it a dual socket capable of accepting headphones or plugging monitors into. That's what you should plug your power monitors into in your studio, and now I'm going to explain why. Got my drum kit playing, okay, and I switch this into main. Okay, and I'll drop, remember I took these out when I was showing the subgroups, I took them out of the main mix, so I'll drop them into my main mix now. And now my main mix is arriving at, you know, all these channels are going to the main left-right bus here, and I'm listening to that main left-right bus because I've got this main button switched in, and now I can adjust the volume coming out of this socket to my monitors or headphones, and I can adjust it to any volume I want. But if I turn it down, the signal is still there on the master left-right bus. Look, I've got this pair of sockets plugged in. It could be that pair, but I'm using these because it's easier. And I'm going to plug one of those into this speaker now. And look, there you go. There's my mix, still coming out of the main left-right outs, undisturbed. Yeah. But if I go back now and plug in my phone control room output to my speakers only, it's gone silent, and that's because my phone control room volume is down. Okay? So the idea is this: in the studio, you plug your master stereo recorder into either of that pair of sockets, and you do your mix like that with this fader, and you mix everything coming through the board, and at the end you do your fade out if required. Right? This mix bus is never disturbed by anything unless you drop this fader. Okay. This is where I control my volume of my monitors in my control room. Now, let's say I'm recording a mix to my master left-right, going out of here to my stereo DAT or tape machine. I'm in the process of recording that mix. The phone rings. Well, if I drop the main fader, I've dropped the signal going to my recorder, and I've wrecked the recording, and I've got to redo it. But I can just turn down the volume here in my control room monitors, answer the phone, and then fade it back up if I want to listen. The other thing, of course, is you can choose to listen to different sources. If I'm building a mix of channels to send out of subgroup 1, 2 to be recorded, I simply drop out my mains button here. Okay. The signal is still not being interrupted going out of this fader though, even though it's not on the meters anymore, because whichever button you have selected here also selects what the meters are showing. So if I drop the main back in, there's the signal still. All I'm doing is I'm dropping this button out on the phone control panel, so I'm no longer monitoring the left-right mix, but that signal is still coming out of this main left-right master sockets. I can show you that by just, look, it's still there. Yeah, there it is. Let's put the phone controlling back in. Okay. So I want to now monitor what's the mix that I'm sending to this pair of subgroups to be recorded out of here to my Mac or PC input 1, 2. So here's my drums. I punch them into my 1, 2 subgroup, and now I'm listening to my 1, 2 subgroup, and there I'm listening now to the subgroups. Okay, there they are, and I can then listen to the mix that's being fed out of my 1, 2 subgroup pair, and also I'm looking at its metering on here in terms of the level being sent to my PC or Mac as well. I can choose to listen to subgroup 3, 4. I can also choose to listen to the CD tape, which is graded to gig. This is, though you wouldn't use that in the studio, but in a gig you would use it. You'd plug your headphones in up here on the phone control room socket. You'd have your tape or CD wide in here. You would use this button depressed and adjust the volume and listen on headphones while the band is playing through the board out of the main left-right mix up here, undisturbed, and it allows you to plug in headphones and listen to the CD tape input and queue up a track ready for dropping it in when the band's finished. And most importantly of all, you can monitor your auxiliary 1, 2 send bus. Now, in the studio, I drop in the main mix. That's my main mix in my control room. Okay, I'm listening to the main mix now, this main mix bus. The musicians in the studio, remember beginners, auxiliary bus 1 and 2 feeds the mix to the musicians in the studio. And my musicians have told me they want to mix with all hi-hat, no percussion, and a tiny bit of kick and snare, because they want to just take their timing from the hi-hat. So, in my control room, I drop in the auxiliary send 1-2 button, and I'm now listening to that auxiliary 1-2 bus, and I raise my hi-hat, so they've got lots of hi-hat, no percussion, a little bit of kick, a little bit of snare, and that's the musician's mix I'm listening to now, as loud as I like or whatever, yeah? I've got these speakers turned down, by the way. And that is the musician's mix. Lots of hi-hat. I then go back to listening to my main mix. It's completely different. See what I mean? So I can monitor my auxiliary 1-2 send bus as well. Which is fantastic. In a gig, you plug in headphones here, and while your main mix is being fed out, if you want to, you can monitor your auxiliary 1-2 bus that's sending out to the monitors on the stage to see what mix is being sent to the monitors on the stage by listening on headphones. So this is your master controller, where you choose what you're listening to and adjust its volume, and that's why you always in the studio plug your monitors into this, not the master outs. Plug your stereo recorder if you use one into that. Okay. The final reason why you should use this is because as I said, the solo bus is wired to this phone control room monitor bus. It is not wired to the main left-right. So again, I'm listening to my main mix. I solo the snare. Because this panel also controls the meters, now my snare only shows in my meters, and I'm now looking just at my snare on the meters, right? And I'm listening to just my snare. But if I go back and plug in the main left-right output, there's my whole mix, undisturbed, you see. So the point being, in a studio, if I have my monitors plugged in here and I solo something, I still hear the whole mix. I don't hear the soloed instrument. I can see it on the meters, but I can't hear it. Again, why you should always use that for your monitor outs, the phone control room out, right? Don't use these master outs. Okay, so let's see now how this phone control room panel works in conjunction with the metering and stuff. So we've established that when you solo a channel, or more than one channel, it overrides only this phone control room bus, not the master left-right bus. Anything soloed also appears in the meters and overrides whatever button you've got pressed, which is showing in the meters. So I'm looking with the main button down. These meters are showing the main left-right mix. I'll fade it out and it goes, I'll bring it up and it's back. If I solo the snare, I'm now only looking at the snare in the meters. Okay, now at the bottom of the meters, you notice this solo lamp is lit. The bottom two lamps are indicator lamps. Solo is lit because the button is up, and I'm looking now at the position of that snare in the stereo mix, because in normal mode with this button up, I'm looking on the meters at the snare in terms of its level and its pan position. Look, I'll pan it, yeah, and I'll adjust the level. Okay. So I'm looking at its position in the stereo mix. But if I drop this button into PFL, we're in pre-fade listen mode then. And the metering, the light switches to show PFL, and only one side of the meter now works. And that's because we're now, if I turn this up and listen, I drop the fader for that channel, but we still get the sound and the level on the meter. And the reason it's switched to just one side is because now we're not looking at this channel anymore with the fader and pan included. We're looking at this channel and listening to this channel pre-fade listen, so before the fader and pan. That allows me now to see the metering for that channel, which is a mono channel. That's why only one side of the meter is required. And I can now adjust the gain to get just the right amount of input level I want, as a sort of more accurate way of seeing the input level of that channel beyond using the little flickering LED indicator. Yeah? Once I've set its input accurately, I then switch it back, and I'm now looking at it in terms of its pan position and everything like that. Okay? And the soloing only overrides this phone control room bus that's feeding this output. That's why if you have your monitors plugged into your main left-right and you solo something, you will not hear it being soloed. You'll see it on the meters being soloed, but you will not hear it being soloed. I suppose what Behringer is saying in their manual is, if you need to solo something, plug in a pair of headphones in and listen to it on headphones, but you're listening to your whole mix on your speakers. But again, if you're in a studio scenario, if I plug headphones into here and go, all right, I'll do it the way Behringer have done it, my monitors are powered from this pair of sockets, which, as we've seen, when you solo something, don't get affected. The mix continually comes out of them, so your monitors are blasting away. I then put a pair of headphones in here, solo an instrument, turn up the volume here. Oh yeah, I've got that instrument soloed in my headphones, but it's still coming out of my speakers because the solo doesn't override the speakers. So I've got to turn up my headphones loud enough to override the sound of the monitors that might be leaking through in the room, or I've got to drop that out. And if I drop that out, I'm dropping. You know what I mean? It's just trust me. Plug your monitors into that. In a live gig scenario, the way you'd use the soloing, just quickly to show beginners, is, let's say I've got my drums playing. There they are. There's my mix. And suddenly, during the mix, which remember is feeding out of this main bus to the master sockets and to the PA, suddenly during the mix I hear a channel crackling. Which channel is it, I want to know. I plug my headphones in here, turn up the volume, and I start soloing my channels. And I can listen on the headphones to the channels one by one until I find a crackling channel and adjust its volume, or the volume of what I'm listening to in the headphones with that. So that's why you'd use it in a gig. You plug headphones in there to check channels. Okay. And of course you can check what's going to your monitors on the stage by depressing that button and check your mix as well. We showed all that already. So that's how the metering works. And lastly, to say, the top indicator on the right side is a power LED indicator, which is extremely bright, and on the right top ladder, yeah, that's what that LED does. It functions as a power lamp, and the left hand one is the 48 volt phantom power indicator light, which I will now switch on. There's the switch for the phantom power. I've got a mic plugged in, which I need phantom power for, because here's the mic, it's an old calibrate, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the graphic. I really hope this has come out and there's no dropouts on this tape. Right, so I'll put the mic pointing towards the speaker and turn off the drum machine. Bring up the mic a bit. Alright. It's working. Is it all wrong channel? Hang on. That's that one. Yep. Okay. So that's your phone controller panel in combination with your metering and what have you. Now, just to look at this graphic, I'm just going to put a little bit of tissue paper over that blue LED power indicator because it's very, very bright and it's going to reflect in the camera. Okay, let's look at this 9-band graphic with FBQ feedback detection. Okay, got a bit of reflection on that. Now, you drop it in using the EQ in button, and there it is, all the lights come on. And now it's strapped by default across my main left-right master output. Okay, and I'll listen to that. Whoops, oh, I've got the mic plugged in still, haven't I? Let's put the drums on again for a minute just to show you that graphic. Hang on, here we go. So, here's my drums, 9-band graphic. Yeah. There you go. It works as a standard graphic. And by default it's strapped across my main left-right mix. Okay, now, if you drop in the FBQ in button, the lights kind of go out, but then they start flickering. And what's happening now is the frequencies of the whole mix arriving at my main left-right bus are being split into 9 frequency bands, and those bands are just electrical voltage passing through each fader. And so the more electrical voltage there is in that frequency, the brighter the LED flickers. So if I lower all my faders and now just have my kick drum and turn up the bass on that and roll off the tops, look at my graphic, it's mostly showing bass activity, nothing up the top. If I bring up my hi-hat now, roll off the bottom end, turn up the treble, alright, let's turn that one down. Now I'm getting flickering at the top end of the graphic, but very little if anything down the bottom, because I'm boosting the top end only. So it shows you visually which frequencies are sort of more powerful by the amount of flickering on that frequency LED. Okay, so now let's bring this mic in. I'll fade up the channel, and I'm going to bring up the volume, and let's see what happens. Okay, watch the graphic. I'll just move the lamp away just a little bit. Here we go. Bring up the volume. that? As soon as you get feedback, it lights up, and then you can just reach out and lower it, and it shows you which one it is. Oops, I'll slow that a bit more. We've got this little box and prop the mic up so it's pointing more at the tweeter. Just lower the volume. Here we go. Try and get some top end out of it now. I'll just roll the bass off that mic channel. Okay, here we go. Let's try and get some treble feedback now. I don't advise you do this at home. Here we go. Turn up the speaker. See that? Yeah. So easy visual cue, showing you feedback. And then all you do is reach out and drop the little fader that's offending, and that lowers that frequency just enough to kill the feedback. Okay, now let's just talk about this generally. As I said, with this graphic, a 9-band graphic strapped across your front, left, right mix at a gig is not very useful. Yeah, sure, you can tailor off a bit of the bass end or something, but you know where you'd use it to set a good curve if you wanted to do that. But the main master outs, either pair, have a pair of inserts. So you can strap whatever you like across your main, left, right mix at a gig, whether that be a a stereo 31-band graphic pair, or a maximizer, or whatever you like. So that's not a problem. And besides, you wouldn't really use a 9-band graphic across your front of house at a gig anyway. As I said, it's not enough frequencies really. And the other thing is, your front of house PA, the speakers the audience are listening to, they're not the ones that give you feedback, unless there's some real bad design fault in the room, or the PA is in a very, very low ceiling sort of club playing area and the tweeters are right up by the ceiling. You might get feedback then and stuff, but generally speaking, when you do PAs, when you set up a PA, look, imagine this mixer is the front of the stage. Always have your PA stacks each side further forward than the front of the stage, so the singer's microphones are always behind the PA speakers. Okay. Now, in a gig, the place you always get your feedback from is the monitors along the front of the stage, the ones that point straight up at the singer and all the other mics. Because the speakers on the wedge monitors are pointing straight up at the microphone, they are the ones that give you your feedback problems. And that is where this graphic is a killer. Just to reiterate for beginners, remember we said that in part 1, when you've got these auxiliary 1 and 2s dropped into pre-fade mode, you use them to send a mix to your musicians in the playing room or to monitors on the stage. In a playing room scenario, you would use one of these auxiliaries as the left side of that mix and the other side as the right side of the mix to build a stereo mix being sent to your musicians in the other room. In a gig scenario, you've got the choice of having a stereo monitoring on stage, which is highly unlikely in a pub gig, but what you'd normally do is you'd have one lot of wedges across the front of the stage, and that's it usually. So they're mono, it's a mono chain, like one feeding into another, feeding into another. And basically, you just would use auxiliary 1 to send a mix out from the channels that you want to that set of wedges across the front of the stage. If you need a second set of monitors on the stage, maybe at the back for the drummer and a keyboard player or whatever, then use the second auxiliary to send out another mono monitor mix. Okay, but if you make the number 1 auxiliary for your wedges, first of all it's at the top so it's easy to reach for logically, but the other thing is, on the graphic you can switch it from main into your auxiliary 1 bus, not the auxiliary 1 and 2, only the auxiliary 1. So now that 9-band graphic is strapped across the auxiliary 1 bus that is powering the mix being fed to the monitors along the front of the stage that are pointing straight up at the mics. Do you get it now? Now, with this feedback detect and kill thing, the place where you really always get your feedback from, the monitors, can be easily defeated. You just see some feedback, reach out and drop it. The audience will not hear any difference in the sound because the main left-right mix is not being affected at all. All that's happening is you're dropping that frequency in the monitors on the stage, and of course 9-band of graphic is actually quite adequate to tailor the EQ curve of a set of wedges along the front of a stage at a typical pub club gig. And it allows you to quickly and easily visually defeat feedback on that monitor wedge set along the stage. Yeah, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. That's where this really scores. It's a killer application. And all that will happen is, if a frequency starts feeding back, say 8K, and you drop it, all that will happen is the feedback will go that the musicians are hearing, And all that will happen is they will notice that their monitor mix coming up at them has gone a bit dull, that the 8K has been dropped. You know, they'll notice it gets slightly less trebly. Once you've dropped that back, you can try and bring it back up, and if it starts to glow again, just leave it at that level where it's not feeding back, and then just reach over and slightly lower your auxiliary 1 bus mix. Okay, unless you know which channel is offending. In this case, lower that channel just a fraction maybe in the monitor mix like that. But it basically allows you to just then re-tailor that graphic EQ curve if a problem occurs during a gig. Okay, fantastic. I mean, let me tell you, man, at a gig, you start doing gigs with this, regular little PAs, and learn to use that if you're a beginner. That will save your ass so many times. What a fantastic feature for live. For the studio, not really of much use. But, you know, don't knock it because of that. Okay, so that's the 9-band graphic, and that just leaves these effects processors, which I want to leave till now. There are 2 of them. Okay, all the controls, apart from this one here, on either processor are in orange, and that is to show that they quite clearly belong to these effects send auxiliaries here. Okay, and basically, as we explained in part 1, effects 1 and effects 2 auxiliary bus are hardwired to the effects processors. Effects bus 1 feeds processor 1, and effects bus 2 feeds processor 2. Right, now let's just look at one processor because they're identical. The top left control is the volume control for effects 1 send, and on the second one it's effects 2 send. So if I send some snare out, okay, to effects processor 1, this adjusts the final level input of anything sending into effects 1 bus coming into this processor. But this control here also not only is the input volume control for this processor, the master control for the volume on effects 1 send bus, but it's also the master volume control for the effects send sockets at the top here. You've got one for each effects send bus. So the 2 effects units can be used together, and the 2 effects send buses can also send out of their own sockets to use hardware effects, and you can use hardware and the onboard at the same time. Okay. In terms of routing any hardware external effects back into the mix, if you run out of channels, you are actually given these 2 stereo effects return pairs of sockets up here, pair 1 and pair 2. There are no controls to adjust their level coming back in or route where they come back into. By default, they are hardwired into your main left-right mix, so if you were bringing a stereo effect unit back in, you'd have to adjust its level in the mix using the output on the physical effect unit as it routes back into the mix. But hey, a very useful addition as a bonus here. So the beauty of this desk, as you can see, is that you've got these 2 auxiliaries, right, and then you've got these 2 effects sends, which are additional auxiliaries, and they are hardwired to these effects processors, but also they feed their own effects sockets outputs, you know, like traditional auxiliary sends. So you've got a 4 send bus with onboard effects as well, and you can use the internal and external effects at the same time. Bonus, man, absolute bonus. Let's bring a bit of light over that. Might get rid of that redness. Okay. In terms of the routing of the outputs of these effects processors, it works this way. This is on this one and on the second one. That's your master output for the effects processor. Yeah? Effects 1 to main, effects 2 to main. So looking at effects processor 1, if I have this main sub button up, this output is then feeding the effects output into my main left-right mix. So I'll get a bit of that snare going, send it into effects unit 1, right, and then if I just bring up the volume, let's choose the reverb. Yeah, and that's just the level of my effect coming back into the mix. And that adjusts the level of the bus coming, the send coming into the unit. Yeah. Yeah. Alright, that's what that does. That's the effects master output. You can choose whether you're sending the effects unit output to your main, or if you depress that, you'll then sending this master out for the effects unit to your subs, and you choose with the second button which pair of subgroups you're sending that effects unit out to, 1 and 2, or sub 3 and 4 with it down. Okay, so that of course allows you to add monitoring effect, to add effect outputs from either or both processors to your subgroups. So you can add effects to channels that are being routed to the subgroups and add effects to be recorded with the sound as well. So it allows you to add effects and record them via your subgroup outs, which is a nice little bonus. The other thing, of course, well not of course, but the other thing that these effects units do is on the first processor now, effects 1 to auxiliary 1, effects 1 to auxiliary 2, and on the second processor, effects 2 to auxiliary 1, effects 2 to auxiliary 2. Either or both effects units can feed their output into the auxiliary 1 or 2 bus, which, remember noobs, the auxiliary 1-2 bus feeds your musician's mix. It allows you to send monitoring effects out into the musician's mix. So if you've got someone in the other room singing, you can add some reverb and delay from the two processors into their auxiliary send mix, and you provide them with a nice EQ, EQ, if you wanted to add EQ to the mic. But it allows you to add some reverb and delay or whatever to what they're listening to, so they get some nice monitoring effects to sing along with, and you can record their output via the subgroup completely dry without any effects added. Okay, so that's what the routing does on these controls on the effects processor. And finally, got this master button in the middle. All the effects are listed, written down there, so you don't ever lose them. And you just scroll through with this alpha dial like that. Choose the sound you want, the preset you want, and when you've got it, you press the pot which acts as a button, and it's fixed. It stops flashing. That's the selected preset. Okay. Now, you've got a selection of presets, loads of different reverbs from cathedral and plates down to small early reflections and ambience, as well as gated reverse and some other wacky stuff. You've then got time-based effects, choruses and all usual time-based effects, 10 delay presets, and then combination effects. The reverbs, delays, they're all very good effects for them, you know, for the whole price of the board. They're 24-bit, they're very nice. The reverbs and delays and everything, perfect for gigs, man. You won't have to bring any effects to a gig, just add a bit of delay, a bit of reverb to whatever you like, you know, bang, done and dusted. In the home recording scenario, for a beginner who's got not much kit, you have these additional insert effects: compressor, expanded gate, and there's ultramizer, ultra bass, panner, exciter. The exciter is quite good. The auto filter works, it's quite good. The tube distortion, very good. Guitar, the 4 presets for that, wasn't very impressed. I thought it would have modelling cabinet built in, but it seems to just be 4 different levels of distortion really. There's a vinylizer that puts crackle and pops on your sound. And finally a very useful test tone, we'll come to that in a bit. Now, if you want to use these insert style effects, they're listed and called that because they're insert type effects. Okay, watch this. I'll bring up the kick, bring up the snare, right? Okay, it's being routed to my 1-2 left-right mix. Oh, it's a hi-hat. There you go. And I'm sending a little bit of it out to this processor here. I'm now going to dial up the compressor, which is 7.1. There it is, 7.1. Okay. Now, if I make this effects processor, let's turn the volume down a minute. This effects processor, so it's with this button up, so it's sending into the main left-right with the original snare. And now watch what happens when I bring up the compressed snare coming out of this effects unit. Hear that? That's like flanging. There's a slight delay of the signal coming down the bus into the unit processor, out and into the wherever it's being routed to. There's a slight delay, which makes no difference, of course, when you're using the additive time-based effects like reverb and delay and things. But when it comes to using these insert effects, you would use this slightly differently. In a recording scenario, let's say this snare was, I don't know, a vocal mic or a bass guitar, and I wanted to add some compression to it and record that out of my subgroup to my Mac PC. Easy peasy. Route your bass, but it's going to be the snare for this, but say it's a bass guitar or something, route it to the required subgroup, in this case 1-2 pair. Okay, but take it, actually no, you don't want it in anything. You take it completely out of all the subgroups and the main mix. It's no longer in the mix. Okay, now I'm sending some of it out into the effects 1 bus where I've got the compression being added, right? Now if I fade this up now, with this feeding out to my main left-right mix, I'll hear only compressed snare. No flanging anymore, because all I'm getting is the compressed version coming back. The original is not reaching the main left-right mix. Okay. That tiny fractional delay won't matter now in this. We're talking about like a millisecond. Okay. So you're now getting compressed only output coming into your main left-right mix, but we want it to go to the subgroup. So I just drop this button, and with this button up, it's going to subgroup 1, 2. So now it is going to subgroup 1, 2 here. Raise that up. It's coming into my subgroup. You don't hear it, and the reason is because I'm not monitoring this pair of subgroups. Their left-right buttons are not switched in. So now on my phone control room panel, I choose not to listen to main anymore, but I listen to subgroup 1, 2, and there's my compressed snare. See that? And that can now go off to be recorded. Just compressed snare, none of the original snare. Yeah. So that's how you would add insert or other compressor or other type inserts effects to a signal and route it to subgroups to be recorded, bypassing the original signal and having only the entirely processed signal being fed out to be recorded. You could attempt to do things like parallel compression. You could try it by bringing up, the main, by routing your actual drum mix or whatever you wanted to try and parallel compress to whatever subgroups and mains and bringing in the effect with it. But that's another whole other story. Okay, finally, I just want to show this test. Oh, let me just show you some delays actually. I don't know if I've got time for this, but just show you a few delays. 43. They begin at. There we go. Just different delay times, yeah. Okay, now just to talk about these effects processors a bit. The downside is none of the effects are editable, not even one parameter, which initially disappointed me. I thought, well, I've got a V-amp next door, it cost me 60 something quid, and it's brilliant, and it's got built-in effects, and every effect has one editable parameter at least, and it's got compressors and you can edit that as well. So initially I was disappointed, but now that I've seen that these auxiliary, the FX1 and FX2 additional auxiliaries have their own dedicated socket and they can be used traditionally in combination with the onboard effects, I'm starting to even see these onboard effects as like included freebies almost. Do you get what I mean? Trust me, the sound quality is well good enough to use for adding general type effects at a gig. You will not need to bring a dedicated delay unit and reverb and things like that. And you've got all those advantages of being able to route effects out into your auxiliary bus to add monitor effects for a performer if you're recording, or to route effects or processed channels or combinations of channels to your subgroups to record and stuff like that. Finally, just to show you that there's this test tone. Oh, I would just say the exciter and ultramizer and things are very good. The only thing that let me down of the effects, I thought, was the guitar amp, to be honest. Okay, finally you've got this test tone, so if I dial that in at 99, there you go. Right, what you do is turn up the output full. Now, test tone, 1K test tone. Let me take that snare out. At the moment it's going to my main, so if I raise my main fader to 0, I've got 0 on there, and now I can, because I've got 0 set now with the test tone on my meters with this fader set at 0, I can now calibrate the output, that 1K test tone that will be sent out of my main master outs to if I want to calibrate the input of a recorder. I can also, of course, by pressing this button, send that test tone to my subgroups, and now I'm sending it to subgroup 1, 2. And if I raise subgroup 1, 2 like that, and drop in my subgroup 1, 2 button on my monitor for phone controlling thing, which remember also selects what's being metered, I raise my faders, they're just a little under. Oop, there we go, until I've got 0. Okay. So now I've got 0 on here. Yep. I can now, that's sending that 1K test tone out of the output 1, 2 for the subgroups, and I can use that to calibrate the inputs on my PC Mac, so that when I've got something metering on here, I know it's got the right level coming into my PC Mac. So a very useful addition is that test tone is. Well, actually a lot really, isn't it? Just lastly to say about the all the sockets on the top. The master outs are balanced, okay, whether you choose the gold plated XLRs or use tip ring sleeve, which can also work as unbalanced. they're the only balanced sockets on the board apart from, well actually that's apart from the line inputs on the main channels. They have got an impedance when balanced of 240 ohms approximately, or 120 ohms unbalanced, and they've got a maximum output of plus 28 dBu. All the other sockets, like the subgroup outs, the effects and auxiliary sends, and the mono out and what have you, are plus 22 dBu max out and 120 ohms approx, and they're unbalanced. Well, actually a lot really. Just to sum up, it's a fantastic little board. Yeah. Assuming it's going to be reliable in day-to-day use, and you would never, if you're going to do gigs and things, get a flight case here. Don't ever take one of these out unflight cased. Assuming it, Behringer say apparently that all these pots on the board are sealed units, so dust can't get in. We've already shown you've got very usable preamps. I'll record a little something through them and put it up on the page. There are some WAV files. You know, and I can compare that, if you like, to an Apogee Duet, because I've just got an Apogee Duet, so I could make a comparison recording of the same mic being fed into a Duet and then these preamps, and you can hear the difference if you like. I'll do that over the next week. But suffice to say, 16 very, very good usable quiet preamps with tons of range, great EQ, easy functions like the level set trim indicators, lots of abilities with the routing of the effects processors and stuff, 4 true auxiliaries. You've even got the CD tape, in and outs. Lastly, there's this little foot switch up here, which I haven't had a chance to try because I don't have a foot switch, but it says tip FX1, ring FX2, and apparently you plug a dual function foot switch in there and it allows you to just mute or unmute either effects processor. You know, the only thing to say about those effects processors otherwise is that, you know, like I said, the effects are very good, very usable, and you know, so don't think just because they're not editable that they're not very good. In a live scenario, using this at typical local gigs, absolutely perfect. And for the recordist who's on a budget in the beginning, once you learn how to do that routing I just showed you, you can apply those compressors and things, albeit, you know, no parameters, but it'll give you some compression to keep something like a bass guitar under control when you're recording it and stuff like that. There are 3 compressor presets, just different amounts of compression. You've got the ultramizer and ultra bass and a few other bits and bobs, you know. Yeah, very, very usable, man. And the mono out, remember, fantastic little bonus that. I mean, all in all, it's an incredibly compact little mixer. You know, and as long as it's reliable, man, I'll give this 10 out of 10. I mean, it's superb. I could do any local gig with this mixer. I'm telling you, anything. To be honest, you could. I mean, I could. I'm not saying I would, but I could. You could even mix a venue the size of the Brixton Academy with a mixer like this, as long as 16 mic inputs were enough. You know, it's got everything you want. Just add a few extras and you're away, you know. For local gigs it's perfect, small and compact. The colour coordination makes everything very uncluttered and easy to go to. The graphic with that ability to strap it over auxiliary 1 is a fantastic bonus. And that's your lot really. I'm going to leave it there. So give it a, you know, 10 out of 10 for the money. 330 quid or something, you know, 25 quid. But there you go. There's your review. Hope it's been of use, even though it was a really long haul. Okay, see you later, guys.